About the year 2000, my wife and I made the decision to go to India. It was at the request of someone that wanted us to come there and help start a Christian church. So we went there, and we did help start a Christian church, all right. I got acquainted with a number of pastors in the area, some of them very fine men. And I realized after talking with them that they knew very little about the Bible. And so at the request of some of the pastors, I started holding classes for them, just to teach them the basic teachings of the Bible. And it turned out very well. They enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. And we got a real friendship going. But while we were doing this, my wife and I noticed the condition of a lot of children. There are, in certain areas of India, quite a few orphan children actually living on the street. Maybe their parents have both died. Maybe their father has died and their mother cannot make enough money to even feed them. So she tells them to go out and beg on the street. And these poor children, usually they only get something to eat every second or third day. So we decided that we would start an orphanage. And really not realizing how far it was going to go. So one day we had one little girl. And then the next day we had two more. The first little girl, we gave her the name of Eunice. And that was handy because later on her younger sister came in. We gave her the name of Lois. And those of you that are acquainted with the Bible know that they were mother and daughter in the Bible. Well, anyway, then we got Sarah and Timothy. Now these children all came to us with Hindu names. But there's names that as Americans we couldn't remember. And so we started giving them Bible names. And it worked out real good. So now Sarah and Timothy, Sarah was 7 and Timothy 4, and now Sarah is 20. And she's ready to go into nursing school. So things have progressed. In a little while we had 12 children, and then we had 17, and then we had 35, and today we've got 3 orphanages. We're taking care of over 200 children, putting about 20 children through a Christian high school. And with each orphanage, we've started a school. It's kind of necessary to have a school so you can control more what the children are learning. And we're interested in them learning history, of course, where children normally in India don't learn history. And of course, the reading, writing, and the math. Well, as time went on, we had to move our orphanage from a little village. We lived in that village for 7 years. And so 6 of those years, 6.5 of those years, we have an orphanage there. But it came to a point where we needed to move, so we moved into a city about 25 miles away. And immediately the orphanage grew. The way we get these orphans is, I've got pastors now. I've trained pastors and started churches and helped strengthen churches in more than 100 villages. And so someone will tell one of our pastors, pastor, over in such and such a village, there's 2 children living on the street. Well, he knows what's happened. Their father has either died or run off and left their mother. And, or maybe the mother's died too, and he goes over and investigates, and he'll get a hold of one of my orphan managers and say, oh, there's 2 children living on the street here. And can I bring them into the orphanage? Now over in India we call it a hostel. And can I bring the kids into the hostel? So the orphan managers say, well, yes, bring them in. And they come in, and you should see them. They're very pathetic. Many times they have no clothes at all, or maybe they will have a little tiny bit, you know, a pair of shorts on or something like that. And their hair is all matted up over their head. What we have to do is just take clippers and just cut all their hair off, girls and boys, and start over, because there's so many lice and everything else in their hair. It's just terrible. And they're always hungry, so the first thing they do really is give them something to eat. When they're on the street begging as orphans, they usually only get something to eat every second or third day. So they're always hungry. And so they come in, we give them something to eat. The ladies give them a bath, cut their hair off, give them a bath, and then find some clothes for them to wear. And one of the things that really surprises the children is kind of interesting. A while back in one of my orphanages. It actually happened in 2 orphanages, but the one in this city that where Thomas is the orphan manager, he called me one night and he says, "Sir, we've got 10 new little children here." He says, "I know we're a little short on money. What can you do with these children?" He says, they're all naked. They're all very, very hungry, and they're all filthy." And I said, "Brother, you do with those children what you think God would want you to do." And he says, "Thank you, sir. We'll adjust." He knew we were short on money, but I knew that if I already had 65 children there, and if God can give us the money to feed 65 children, he can give us the money to feed 75 children. So he said, "Thank you." And so the ladies there immediately gave them something to eat. Maybe they'd already given them something to eat by this time, because orphans come in there, they're always starved. And then gave them a bath, cut their hair off, got some clothes on them. And later on that evening, I saw the children. And they were really cute little children. I was so glad that we could help them. It really tugs on your heartstrings, because you see these little children so needy. And it does bother me seeing children in America throwing away good food. And in India, if there's anything on the ground that is possibly edible, a child is going to go pick it up and eat it. He doesn't know anything about bacteria, and his intestines are so strong that he can eat about anything. So now we've had 65 and then 75 children in this orphanage, and it was necessary to start a school. So with this particular orphanage, I've got a school, and we've got teachers, and we try to take the children, find out where they're at. We start below kindergarten and teaching them how to obey in school and how to obey anyone that's an authority over them. And then they progress on up through school. And at the 7th class, after they finish the 7th class, from then on, the government is much stricter about what they are taught. At the 7th class, they do have to take, at the end of the 7th class, they take a very extensive test from the government. And so to see what level they really are. Of course, we give them tests every year, so we know if they're where they should be, and if a child needs to be held back, we held him back, let him go through the class again. And then there's a Christian high school about a 3-hour drive from where we live. And at the 7th class, then we'll take them down there. And so they go to the 8th class and 9th and 10th class. And then they have what they call +1 and +2, which is like college level in India. So it's 11th and 12th. And after that, then they're ready to go to the university. And I've already put probably 8 girls through what they would call the university, through nurses training, and they're nurses now, making their living. Right now I'm putting a girl through medical school. It's interesting that I can put a girl through medical school, and she's on the top 5% of her class, and it's only $1,500 a year for medical school. Well, continuing on thinking about these different orphanages, I've got one that's about an 8-hour train ride south of me. And the man that started this, he called me up one day and has an interesting story. When he was 5 years old, his father died. And there was 3 children in the family. And his mother said to him, "You know, I'm not going to be able to feed you. You're going to have to go out on the street and beg." And he says that, boy, at 5 years old, he said, I was scared to death. He said, I had to walk out of my mother's house, and my mother said to me, "Don't come back to see me very often because I can't do anything for you." And he said, when I walked out of that house, I knew I'd have no place to sleep except where I could find, and no food except what I could beg for. And quite a story with him. He lived on the street for a couple of years. Then a man said to him, "You know, if you'd go to that government school over there," he says, "I'll help you get an old uniform." Many of you realize that in other countries, almost every foreign country, you've got to have a uniform to go to school. So he said, well, yes. And he said he didn't know what the kids would do in school. He saw kids going into these big buildings, but because he was an orphan and they had parents, they wouldn't talk to him because he was so much lower class than they were. So he didn't know what they did. So the man helped him get an old uniform and took him in and registered him in the school. And he said, "Oh, I love school. Went right to the top of my class." He's a very intelligent man. now. And but he still had to live on the street and beg. So he'd beg before school and beg after school. And then after another year or so like that, a Christian man said to him, you know, if you'd go to that Christian school over there, I'll buy you a new uniform. He said, wow, I'd never had anything new in my life. And so he said, yeah, I'll go there. So he said the man bought him a new uniform, took him into the school, and registered him. And but he said there was one wonderful thing about this school. Every day at lunch they gave him a free meal. He said, wow, I thought I really had it made. And so, but they didn't invite him into the dormitory to live. He was still sleeping on the street, and he had his old uniform. So on Sunday morning, he'd take the old uniform, put the old uniform on, and wash his new uniform, hang it up so it'd be dry and look nice Monday morning. Of course, they didn't know anything about irons or anything. And they started out, this school is interesting. It starts out at the under kindergarten. They have under kindergarten, and then kindergarten, and then the first grade.
Well, they call it UKG.
They call it UKG
and LKG.
and LKG, and then first grade. And so I don't know where he started out. I didn't remember ever asking him, but anyway, I mentioned the one wonderful thing they did was they gave him a lunch every day. He thought, oh, he had life made. He had one guaranteed meal a day. And he said after school, he would go out and beg some more, and sometimes he'd get a second meal. He thought, wow, 2 meals a day, really wonderful. Well, after 2 years, then they invited him to come and live in the dormitory. And he said when he got in the dormitory, after a few days, he realized he really did have life made, because they gave him 3 meals a day, and in the dormitory room on a cement floor, he had a guaranteed place to sleep. His place to sleep every night on a little bamboo mat. And he thought, what could any rich man want more than I've got? I've got 3 meals a day and a guaranteed place to sleep out of the rain. And so he lived there for several years. He was a very cooperative young man. And when he finally graduated from there, the staff, who were very poorly paid, they took up a collection and wrote a letter to a university asking them to please accept him the first year and let him go through school, because he'd been so cooperative and helpful to everyone, the staff and everyone. And so but it took him 6 years to get through 3 years of school. He'd go to school a year and then work a year, go to school and work, go to school and work. Well then, so he's the one that called me up. Now he's got a master's degree, by the way, in education. And so he's the one that called me up and said to me, sir, I've got 35 little children here that are orphans. They have a place to sleep usually because they've got relatives still living, but their relatives can't feed them. See, we don't understand how poor poverty can be in this country. And he said so they can sleep at their relative's house. Their fathers have all died of AIDS, and most of their mothers have died of AIDS. And so they're begging on the street, and they can only get something to eat every second or third day. He says, do you have enough money so that we could bring these children together and give them 1 meal a day? And he says, I know you're short on money right now. And I said, yes, I am short on money right now. But I said, you know, I believe God would want us to do this. So I said, you go ahead and get it organized, and I'll ask God to help us come up with the money, because I don't beg people for money. If God has a project that needs to be done, He has the money to fulfill it. He's got money in people's pockets. He'll work on their hearts to give it. So he called me 2 days later and he said, sir, I've got everything organized. But he says, you know, I don't have 35 kids now, I have 50. And he says, I've investigated each case, and each case is really pathetic, and they are really in need. And I said, well, brother, if God can give us the money to feed 35 children, He can give us the money to feed 50 children. He says, thank you. So he started bringing them together. He had to hire a woman as a cook, and at first she just had a piece of cloth up there with a fire underneath the sticks and a big pot. And she had that cloth up there because the wind blows a lot, and there was a lot of sand there. She was trying to keep the sand out of the food. But he was bringing the children together and feeding them every day. Well, then he called me and he said, you know, there is a Christian school right here. In fact, it was an Adventist school. And he said, my wife is the principal of this school. And, you know, if you could help these children get a uniform, and if you could help pay a little bit for tuition, you know, we could, as we bring these children to school to eat, we could send them to school too. He says, now, somebody from California, a man from California, did donate a bus a couple of years ago. And if you could help with the diesel, then we could use the bus to pick up the orphan kids as well as the kids that are going to school. And we could have them all here together at the same time. So I said, well, okay. I didn't know where the money was going to come from. But, you know, God is good, and He has given me the money every month to do this. Sometimes I'm really short, but I just ask God to help me more, and He does. So now, in that school, I've got 89 children, but there's about 150 altogether going there. And so now I'm paying for the teacher's salary and all the expenses on the bus, plus the food and everything. And but things are a lot better. Now we've got a room where they cook the food. They're not cooking it outside in the sand anymore. And the children have nice uniforms. They'll have a white uniform, and they'll have a blue uniform. One little boy that came there was kind of talking kind of loud, and I said, what is that boy saying? And he said, wow, we get to eat every day here. And it was really an astonishment to him. And then a few days later, it was in the evening, and he was kind of spouting off again. And I said, what's that boy saying this time? I don't understand very much of the Telugu language. It's a very complicated language. And he said, he's saying, wow, we eat 3 times a day, every day here. You know, just an absolute miracle to him. And so it's really worthwhile helping these children. They're so appreciative of it. My wife and I go there. Now, in Indian culture, children are never hugged and kissed. Well, my wife and I go to these orphanages, and we hug all the children, and they love it. The first time you give them a hug, they kind of cower down, and they look around a little bit. They hope that nobody's seen you give them a hug, because they've never been hugged before. They like it, but they've never been hugged before. You give them a few days, and they love it. They don't care who's watching. They come up, and they want to be hugged, and a lot of times we kiss them too, kiss them on the cheek. Show them that we love them. And they love to be loved. They've never been loved before as orphans. They've been kicked, and people throwing rocks at them and threw boards at them and things. I've seen this happen on the street. But they've never been shown any love or care. And it's really worthwhile. Now that's one of our orphanages. Here's one now. We've got, this is the same one I just showed. This is 89 of the children. We had a program, a Christmas program, in a borrowed church that's close by. And so we had the children here, and they put on skits and everything. You can see some of the teachers off on the right-hand side and the principal on the left, and all the children. Not all the children, but 89 of them here. And they put on a good program. And then we always work it out so that they have any relatives that are living that are helping them with a place to sleep. We invite them, and we provide a meal for them, and we tell their people that are helping how much we appreciate what they're doing for them. So in a way, this is not a full orphanage, because we're not having to supply a place to sleep. But we are supplying all the food and the education and the clothes and the uniforms and everything else, the books, of course, and everything. Now, one need we do have at this school is you realize that all these children in this picture would be living on the street or somewhere, not going to school, because it would cost their relatives roughly $5 a year to pay their school fees to go to a government school, and their relatives can't come up with such a fabulous amount of money. And so these kids would have no education. But the government has come now and said that we have got to build some new classrooms, or they're going to close the school down. They've given us a year to do this. And we need probably $15,000 to build 6 classrooms. Now, I know in America $15,000 wouldn't hardly build one, but we've already had an architect draw up some plans, and they've got to actually build also a library and a science room. And this is figuring having the science room with some microscopes and some books, special books and things like a science lab would have, and a library, then a room to cook their food in. And so all these, we figure around $15,000, $16,000. And I'm sure that God will help us with this. He'll touch somebody's heart, someone that can afford to help. And the government has given us a year to do this. So we do have a need there.
Another thing that we could, that we're considering is that these children have health issues. AIDS is rampant. Most of these children don't have AIDS. In fact, none of them do, but their parents have all died of AIDS. But a lot of them do have and have been exposed to tuberculosis. And these children all need to be checked for the various diseases that are so common in India so that they can have good health.
Yes, my wife and I, when we go to these orphanages, and there's one that we haven't shown you yet, she always checks the kids. She touches every child. If a child is a little warm, has a fever, she'll find out what's wrong with him. Maybe we've got to bring him to our house, and they've got to stay there for a few days. Well, now they consider that a real privilege. And to come there, and then she'll check them over, take them to the doctor, do medical tests on them, whatever is necessary. And a lot of them, we found several of them that have had TB, and we can cure that. And some of them will have even things like what did they have in the Bible?
Leprosy.
Leprosy. Some of them will even have leprosy. And we can cure them of leprosy. Takes a while, and you kind of keep it a little bit separate from the other children. And some of them are predisposed to diabetes. We'll make sure they have food to eat that's going to keep them from getting diabetes.
60% of the Indians in India-wide, have diabetes, and it particularly is true in our area. Their diet is very prone to help them develop diabetes because it consists mostly of white rice and a little curry which has a few vegetables. This is very bad for the children's health because they get other problems like the curries are so hot that they have ulcers. It also is conducive to having cancer and other ailments. So there's a lot of needs in India, and we certainly hope that God can help us to supply the various needs that these children and some of the adults also have.
Well, we try on our orphanages, we try very hard to give the children a much more balanced diet than the average Indian eats. It's not too hard because vegetables are not hard to come by and they're not expensive. What you have to do, you have to get the children used to eating healthful foods instead of the way they've grown up. Now I'd like to take a look at this another orphanage we have. This is not too far from where we live. At the back you can see a couple of young men standing up. One of them in the middle is Benjamin. It's kind of interesting. Benjamin came to us at 7 years old, quite a few years ago now. He's 16 years old now. He came to us at 7 and he'd already been a slave for 2 years. And his father had died, his mother had taken another man, and the man drank. So he put Benjamin out working for a rich man as a slave, and the man would get a little bit of money every month, not very much, probably not more than the equivalent of $1, but he could buy more alcohol that way. But he developed into a fine boy. And another young lady, we don't have her picture here right now, her name was Deborah. She came into our orphanage as a very little girl and has lived there for a number of years. And now Deborah and Benjamin, under the leadership of a pastor that's there, a very mature pastor that lives at the orphanage all the time, they run the orphanage. And they know how to treat the orphans because they grew up as an orphan. And the children, the older girls, in these orphanages, the older girls always take care of the younger girls, see that their clothes are put on right, and their hair is fixed right, and all this kind of thing. They're kind of like mothers. The older girls are kind of like mothers to these younger children. So we have some semi-orphans. A semi-orphan will have a mother living, but not a father. And the mother can't supply anything for them to eat. So we take them in and then we give them an education. Excuse me. Well, we have started churches up in very remote areas where Christians have never gone before. And some of these are mountain villages way back. Some of them are far enough back into the hills that they have tigers walking through the jungles at night. And so when these people that in these villages, when they accept Christianity, then they have a desire for their child to become educated. Before that, they have no desire for the child to become educated. They'll say, well, I never learned to read and write, and so my children don't need to. But for some reason, when they become Christians, then they have a desire for their child to learn to read and write. Well, there's no schools for a long ways. It's miles out of the jungle to a school. And so then they'll call my pastor friend that's running the orphanage, and he'll ask him, they said, is there any way that you could let my son, daughter, come to the hostel and live so they could go to school? We've got these children here now, and they're doing very well. We've started another school here. So this gives us kind of an idea of what we've got. We've got the 3 orphanages, the 3 schools. Altogether, we've got around 200 children here, plus we've got about 20 in this Christian high school. And we really just touched the edge of the need. There is a great need for more. But our orphanages slowly grow all the time. At one point, 2 of our orphanages would get 10 new children in one night. And the need is so great you can't turn them down.
One of our orphanages needs to be relocated. And so we're trying to build a building. And it's partly finished, but it still needs some more. And we're trying to fix it so that we can have a school there and have more children.
Yes, it's actually these children we see in this picture right here. We're going to have to move from this location one day. And we have a piece of property in this particular village, and right next to us is another piece of property we could buy and have a playground and things like this. And we'll end up with probably a 2-story building, be able to take care of 100 children or so. So anyway, we're trying to do our best to fulfill this need. And with people's help, we can do it.